My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. In today's Gospel, Jesus, we see you as you passed through towns and villages, teaching as you went along and as you make your way up towards Jerusalem. That's how St. Luke, the evangelist, presents you to us today. Jesus busy, Jesus working hard in your public life, teaching, speaking, walking from one town to another. Tiring work, self-sacrificing work. And along the way we can imagine lots of people firing all different kinds of questions to you. And today's Gospel testifies to one of those questions. Someone asked him, "Lord, will only a few people be saved?" He answered them, "Strive to enter through the narrow gate. For many, I tell you, will attempt to enter, but will not be strong enough." Strive to enter through the narrow gate. The question is a really good one, and one that Jesus, I'm sure we all ask you in one way or another from time to time. What happens after death? What happens people? What happens souls? Will many be saved? And your response here is somewhat enigmatic, a little bit mysterious. Strive to enter through the narrow gate. For many, I tell you, will attempt to enter, but will not be strong enough. This saying of the Lord Jesus has provoked a lot of discussion down through the history of the Church. And one line of interpretation, a more pessimistic line, is that most people don't make it through the narrow gate. The interpretation exists which says that most souls are not saved. A very sobering thought indeed. Another interpretation, which is also very strong in the Church's tradition, is to say that even if only one or a few souls were lost, that would be too many, far too many, for God who is love. So that would be another way of reading the reference to the narrow gate. One way or the other, we know how important it is to intercede for ourselves and for others, that we would indeed make it through the narrow gate. We don't take it for granted at all that we'll end up in heaven. Life is undoubtedly a battle. At times it can be quite uphill. But Jesus, you're with me. You are the good shepherd. With your rod and your staff, you give me comfort. The narrow gate. Strive to enter through the narrow gate. Perhaps another way of praying about this saying of the Lord Jesus is to think about our own personal vocation. There is a specific gate, you might say, through which each one of us will enter into fullness of life, beginning even in this life. Each of us is uniquely created and therefore uniquely loved by God, and therefore uniquely called by God. And you might say there's a specific gate through which you and I are invited to enter into the fullness of life. And that's our vocation, that's our calling. As Pope Benedict very famously said in his first homily as Pope, each of us is the result of a thought of God. Each of us is willed. Each of us is loved. Each of us is necessary. How important it is for us to have a vocational sense to life. To realize that yes, It is a narrow gate, a specific path, and at times a challenging one too. It is narrow. It is challenging, but also it's the only path that leads to fullness of life. You might say through that narrow gate we open out into the broadest possible horizons of fulfillment, of love, of fullness of life. To have a vocational sense to life, this is something that we see in the saints. And maybe we could consider one particular saint who is very exceptional, we might say, because he was an emperor, no less. This is Blessed Charles of Austria, born in 1887 and who died in 1922, quite young. He was beatified by St. John Paul II on the 3rd of October 2004. And Karl of Austria, Karl von Habsburg, had a deep sense of God's will and of his own vocation in life. He was a man of tremendous faith and trust in God. He had particular devotion to the Blessed Sacrament and to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Both those devotions went hand in hand in his life. And above all, he saw in his role something vocational, something God wanted for him. He was a man of deep prayer, but at the same time discreet, not manifestly very pious, but at the same time very prayerful. He was a married man. He married Zita, or Princess Zita of Parma. And interestingly, on the day before they got married, he said to Zita, "Now we must help each other get to heaven." That's a vocational sense to marriage, where the spouses are helping one another to go through the narrow gate of fullness of life, to seek God's will in their vocation to marriage. Interestingly, on their wedding rings, on the inside band of the wedding ring and the hidden part of the wedding rings, he had engraved that prayer, that oldest written prayer to Our Lady, "We fly to thy patronage, O Holy Mother of God." And he was a man of prayer, also you might say very professional. He suffered enormously during his life. His gate was very narrow, you might say, because of the First World War. He became emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the middle of the First World War in 1916. And it was an extremely painful experience for him. And I suppose part of his greatness was his desire to seek for peace. And he tried all kinds of different ways. But you could say he failed. You know, politically speaking, the experts might say that he failed. The monarchy fell apart. He went into exile. His empire disintegrated. He didn't manage to stop the First World War as soon as he tried. He tried many times to alleviate the suffering, to prevent the war, but he didn't succeed. But he did succeed in living out his vocation, and that was, you might say, officially recognized when he was beatified. St. John Paul II actually said in his homily at the beatification of Blessed Charles of Austria, "The decisive task of Christians consists in seeking and recognizing and following God's will in all things." The Christian statesman, Charles of Austria, confronted this challenge every day. To his eyes, war appeared as something appalling. Amid the tumult of the First World War, he strove to promote the peace initiative of my predecessor, Benedict XV. And that's true. Maybe that's the greatest legacy of this particular saint, was he really strove to care for people, to care for his people, and to build peace. That was his narrow gate, and it wasn't easy. He hadn't an easy life. He died at a very young age from a respiratory illness, and he died in Madeira in exile. His last words, which he said while his wife Zita held a crucifix in front of him, he was looking at the crucifix and he said, "I can't go on much longer. Thy will be done. Yes, yes, as you will it. Jesus. You and I most likely won't have such a dramatic life as Blessed Charles of Austria, and yet every Christian life is dramatic. Every Christian life is a call to go through the narrow gate into the fullness of the heavenly kingdom. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.